Rapture becomes her. Chapter 14. Barnaby carried Emily swiftly through the darkened house. Reaching his horse, he tossed her lightly into the saddle. Leading the horse and heading toward the back of the house, he said, "Now, let's find Lamb and discover what he has been up to." When they arrived at the rear of the house, there was no sign of Lamb, but in the deepening darkness, Barnaby spied Lamb's horse tied in front of the old barn, and the silver of light peeking out from beneath the heavy doors. Motioning Emily for silence and handing her the reins, Barnaby crept to the barn. He disliked leaving Emily alone, but he would have disliked her seeing her cousin's corpse even more. She'd seen enough violence tonight. Barnaby didn't regret killing Answorth. His only regret was that Emily had had to see it, and he didn't want her to see another dead man, especially not one who was related to her. Ear against the thick wooden doors, he listened a moment, frowning when all he heard was the sound of a man sobbing, not Lamb. Gingerly, he opened the door and looked inside the building. A lantern hung from the center beam, illuminating the scene. His arms folded across his chest, Lamb leaned negligently against a post near the middle of the barn, slumped on the floor. Across from him was Jeffrey, Jeffrey still alive. There was no sign of blood, but Jeffrey was sniveling and wiping effectively at his nose. Stepping into the barn, Barnaby asked, "What did you do to him?" "Nothing," Lamb said, disgustedly glancing at Barnaby. "Is she all right?" Barnaby nodded. "Shaken at the moment, but I expect she'll be her usual Freitas adorable self by this time tomorrow." "Answorth?" "Dead," he said flatly. Jeffrey jerked around the gap at him. "You killed Answorth?" "He's dead," Barnaby said in that same flat tone. Jeffrey sat up straighter, his tears drying. "And Emily? She's safe," she swallowed. "He didn't? Let's worry about you and your part in it, shall we?" Barnaby replied, puzzled by Jeffrey's continual existence. Why hadn't Lamb killed him? "Me," Jeffrey said, astonished. "I didn't do anything." Scrambling to his feet, he said earnestly, "This is all Answorth's doing. He made me help him. You must believe me." Barnaby looked at Lamb, and Lamb shrugged. His gaze once more on Jeffrey. Barnaby asked with morbid satisfaction, "If you had nothing to do with the abduction, why are you here?" Jeffrey tugged at his already disheveled career. His eyes slidden away from Barnaby's. "I'm not denying that I knew what he planned, but I could not stop him. He would have killed me, just like he did Kelsey." "Kelsey? The fellow that ran Emily and Anne off the road that night?" Barnaby demanded sharply. Jeffrey nodded. "Yes, Kelsey knew we were meeting here, and he learned from that doxy of his that Anne had gone to visit my mother. He came to tell Answorth and extort money from him. Looking sick, he added. Answorth paid him and then killed him, and forced me to bury Kelsey's body behind the stables. You want me to believe that your only part in this is that you helped conceal a murder and stood by helpless when he abducted your cousin? That you're as much a victim as Emily?" Barnaby growled, disgust and fury rolling through him. It took all his willpower not to leap on Jeffrey and beat him into a pile of blood and bones. Jeffrey started weeping again and wiped at his nose, hanging his head. He muttered, "I'm sorry, so sorry. I know I should have done something, but I swear he would have killed me." "You sniveling coward," Barnaby snarled, and rage getting the better of him. He took a step nearer, the thirst for blood strong. Rather than lift a finger to help her tell others what was planned, you stood by and would have allowed Emily to be raped. "Oh, it's better than that," Lamb said idly, calming some of Barnaby's rage. Lamb's icy blue eyes on Jeffrey. He commanded, "Tell him why you're here hiding." Jeffrey risked a glance at Barnaby and flinched at what he saw in the other man's face. His voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Ann's wife liked to hurt his women, and I couldn't bear to stay in the house and hear her scream and cry for help. So I stayed out here, while his cousin is being subjected to a brutal rape. Her charming relative hides in the stable, crying and feeling sorry for himself. Lamb commented without inflection. Straighten up from his position, he added. He wants killing, but he's so pitiful and disgusting. I couldn't bring myself to touch him. Revolted by Geoffrey's actions in spite of his rage, Barnaby could only agree with Lamb. It would have given him satisfaction to kill Geoffrey, but the man was such a self-serving weakling that he could hardly bear to breathe the same air, let alone touch him. Emily was safe, he reminded himself, and because of that his fist unclenched and he swung away from Geoffrey, fighting down the revulsion that clogged his throat every time he thought of Geoffrey cowering in the barn, leaving Emily to Answay's attentions. Barnaby muttered to Lamb, "We best be on our way. Cornelia will be worried, and the sooner I have Emily at Windmere, the better I shall feel." But what about me?" cried Geoffrey, stumbling forward a few steps. "And what about Answorth's body?" Barnaby flashed him a cold stare. "You seem to be able to dispose of bodies when it suits you. I suggest you take care of it." "But you killed him," Geoffrey protested. "I didn't. I didn't have anything to do with his murder." "And who says I did?" Barnaby peered. "As far as anyone is concerned, I was never here, nor was Emily, nor or Lamb." He smiled, his teeth bared. "I'm sure that your great aunt and any number of other people would be willing to attest to the fact that none of us ever left the breeches well, everyone knows that you've been gone all day with your good friend Answorth," leaving Geoffrey gaping at him, thinking of Emily waiting for him. Barnaby stalked swiftly from the barn, Lamb following him, shoving the door open. He nearly knocked down Emily. Emily had been in the act of opening the door for the opposite side when he came stumbling out of the building. Catching her when she stumbled backward and noting the stout piece of wood she carried in one hand, he held a smile. Spirited and exhaustful, that was his woman. "What were you going to do?" he asked lightly. "Club him to death? Believe me, sweetheart, he isn't worth wasting your time on." "I was coming to help you," she said stiffly, "but it took me a few minutes to find a weapon." "We thank you, dear lady," Lamb said diplomatically from behind Barnaby, "but your assistance is unnecessary this time." Emily sniffed, but dropped the improvised weapon and allowed Barnaby to escort her to his horse. Once they were mounted, Barnaby gulped in several breaths of fresh, clean air. "I don't mean to offend you, my sweet," he murmured into her ear. "I prefer a night lost in London, so to spending any more time in the presence of your cousin." Sorry about that, guys. "But I prefer a night lost in London, sorry to spend in any more time in the presence of your cousin." Emily couldn't argue with that, but she asked soberly, "Is he dead?" Barnaby hesitated. He'd gone into the barn certain that if Lamb had not killed Geoffrey, that he would. "Will you be disappointed if I tell you we left him alive and feeling sorry for himself?" Emily sighed, and Barnabas felt the tenseness leave her body as she leaned more fully against him. "No," she admitted. "He is a pitiful creature, and I loathe him. But I do not want him dead, at least not by your hand." Barnaby dropped a kiss on the top of her head. "Then it's a good thing we left him alive, isn't it? Besides, he serves a purpose. We left the disposal of Answorth's body to him." Emily caught her breath, all of tonight's evenings flooding over her. Full of remorse, she said in trembling tones, "I've made a terrible mess of everything, haven't I? Everything that Cornelia feared happened, and I brought shame and disgrace on her, and put you in an invidious position." Head down, she muttered. "I shall say that I killed him. No one needs to know that you and Lamb were even here." Barnaby's arm tightened around her slender waist. "You have it half right, sweetheart. No one knows that any of us were here tonight." She laughed bitterly. "And how do you explain my unexpected disappearance and my return with you and Lamb? You, my misguided darling, remembering one last thing you wanted to tell Jeb, hurried after him before he was out of sight. You take a shortcut through the woods, hoping to overtake him, before he reached the main road. "That's the most ridiculous tale I've ever heard," she said acidly. Curiosity had her asking, though, "Why do you explain my torn gown and why I was gone so long?" "In the gathering darkness you fell, ripping your gown and twisting your ankle, which made it difficult for you to walk back to the house. Lamb and I, having set out in a gallant search for you, found you seated on the down tree," he ended cheerfully, "and now we're bringing you home." When she remained silent, he added, "I think the twisted ankle is a nice touch, don't you? Of course you'll have to limp for a few days, but overall—" "It might do," she said after a thoughtful pause. "Jeffrey isn't going to want to reveal his part in what happened tonight." She tapped her lower lip with a finger. "Walker and the other servants will know otherwise, but they will say nothing." She brightened. "And if Jeffrey is foolish enough to say anything different, it is really our word against his, isn't it?" "Indeed," said Barnaby. "And who is going to believe that Viscount Jocelyn, strange American though he is, and his manservant were involved in such sordid doings?" For the first time since Geoffrey and Answorth had burst out of the woods, Emily felt that last night of anxiety loosen and disappear. Jocelyn would bear no blame for tonight's doings, and Cornelia would be able to face her neighbors with her head held high. Her great needs had not brought shame on the family. Her cheek pressed against his broad chest, Emily listened to the steady beat of Jocelyn's heart, gratitude tingling with another powerful confusion emotion in her breast. "He saved me," she admitted drowsily, unconsciously smuggling deeper into his secure embrace. Just before sleep took her, the stray thought crossed her mind that it was just as well he hadn't been serious about marrying her, although being married to him wouldn't have been so very bad. The removal to Windmere was not without conflict. Once Emily was at home, and everyone assured that all was well, her room gown changed and her hair combed. Feeling more like herself, she argued that there was no longer any reason for them to seek sanctuary at Windmere. She lost the argument, Cornelia siding with Barnaby. "Answorth may not threaten us any longer," Cornelia agreed smoothly, "but I see no harm in accepting his lordship's very kind offer of hospitality for a few days." She beamed at Barnaby, who lounged nearby. "We owe him a great deal, and it seems a shabby thing to throw his generosity back in his face, all the more so when we are packed and the coach is waiting in the driveway." Emily eyed Cornelia and Jocelyn suspiciously. They were, she decided, far too cozy with each other for her liking. After Cornelia had seen for herself that Emily was indeed unharmed, she had left her to the care of Sally and returned to the Green Saloon to join Jocelyn. Emily would have given a small fortune to know what they talked about while she had been absent, and she couldn't shake the uneasy notion that she had been the topic of conversation. Still, a bit shaky from her order, in the face of Cornelia's defection, in the real debt of gratitude she owed Jocelyn, Emily capitulated. Waking the next morning at Windmill in an impressive rose and ivy bedroom, for one terrible moment not recognizing her surroundings, she lay there frozen with fear. Was Answorth going to walk through the door and pick up where he had left off last night? Heart banking painfully in her chest, she jerked upright, her gaze traveling over the elegantly draped rose-figured ivy silk-hung bed, the similarity-hued rug on the floor, and the gracious furnishings, and she realized suddenly that she was safe at Windmere. The home of Viscount Jocelyn wasn't exactly unknown to her, but her previous visits had only been as a casual guest of the previous Viscount. She never stayed overnight at the magnificent house or at the express invitation of the owner. Her heart rate slowing, Emily pushed back a heavy fall of silvery hair, and still slightly disoriented, wondered what the day would bring. Cornelia had been in her element when they had arrived at Windmere last night, and she had taken as her due the superior service of the various servants in green and wheat livery who had wafted them from the coach and into the mansion, giving no sign that it was anything usual for my lord to return home with two female neighbors as guests. Peckham, after removing their cloaks, had clapped his hands and ordered their trunks and bandboxes carried upstairs. Barnaby took one look at Emily's lean features and suggested that the ladies might wish to retire for the night. Smiling at the two women, he said gently, "There is no need for you to socialize with my cousins tonight. Tomorrow will be soon enough." Emily didn't know whether to be relieved or insulted that she and Cornelia had been sent to bed like a pair of errant children, but she didn't object. A cheerful, fresh-faced young woman had waited for her in the grand bedroom. "Good evening, miss," the young woman had said, dimpling. She had added, "I am Kate, and will be your maid for your stay." Normally, having a stranger wait on her would have bothered Emily, but Kate was so quick and helpful, and realizing that she was wearier than she realized, Emily didn't mind Kate's assistance after all. When Emily was regardlessly installed in the bed with one last smile, Kate had disappeared. Alone in a strange room, Emily had been afraid that after her order, even with its near miraculous outcome, that she would not sleep, but such had not been the case. After a few restless moments, she had relaxed and sleep had come. No nightmares disturbed her slumber. Feeling better than she thought she should, considering what had transpired yesterday, Emily slid from the bed. Her woolen robe lay nearby on an ivory damask-covered chair, and slipping it on, she wandered into the adjoining dressing room, pleased to find ewer of still warm water sitting next to a matching bowl trimmed in gold and decorated with delicate pink rosebuds. She poured some of the water into the bowl and performed her morning's ablutions. Used to seeing to herself most of the time, Emily never considered ringing for a maid, and finding one of her better gowns in a huge mahogany armoire, she quickly dressed, braiding her hair with a lavender silk ribbon that matched the stripe in her silk and wool gown. She fastened a thick gleaming strand to a bun at the base of her neck. She had just entered the charming sitting room adjacent to her bedroom when the door opened and Kate entered the room, humming under her breath. Seeing Emily, Kate stopped surprised. "Miss, I didn't expect to find you up and dressed already," she exclaimed. She smiled. "I was just coming to check on you to see if you were awake, and if the water I brought earlier was still warm." Emily smiled at her. "It was, thank you, and I would appreciate it if you could show me to my aunt's room." Kate did so, and Emily wasn't surprised to find Cornelia up and dressed. Both Emily were early risers. At Emily's entrance, Cornelia said, "Good. I was hoping you were awake. Shall we go downstairs and see if the gentlemen are up?" Emily hesitated, not certain. She was ready to face Jocelyn or the curious eyes of his cousins just yet, aware that she was only postponing the evil moment. She took a deep breath and nodded. Peckham showed the two ladies into the morning room, and Emily tensed when she saw that Jocelyn and his cousins were there before them. The four gentlemen were scattered around the table, the remains of their meal littered across the pristine white tablecloth, and at the entrance of the ladies they all rose politely to their feet. From Matthew's pinched nostrils and a carefully controlled expression on Jocelyn's face, it was obvious that they had interrupted a disagreement of some kind. Matthew greeted them stiffly, and Thomas, following his older brother's lead, did the same. But Simon bowed gracefully over Cornelia's hand and grinned and winked at Emily. Jocelyn, an expression she found hard to read in the black eyes, when he looked at her, escorted the pair of them to the table. Having seated Emily to his right and Cornelia opposite, Jocelyn returned to his place at the head of the table. "I trust you ladies slept well?" he asked, smiling. Emily mumbled a reply, and Cornelia replied in the affirmative. Glancing at Peckham, hovering in the background, Barnaby said, "Serve the ladies, won't you?" Little was said until the ladies were served, and Peckham retired from the room, too aware of Jocelyn's big muscling form only inches from her. Emily kept her eyes on her plate and poked at her food as the conversation picked up around her. Batting her still beautiful hazel eyes, Cornelia flirted outrageously with Simon and Barnaby. To Matthew and Thomas, she was scrupulously polite as they were to her. From the chilly looks sent her way by Matthew and Thomas, Emily had a good idea that she had been the cause of both Matthew's displeasure and the look on Jocelyn's face when she and Cornelia entered the room. She frowned at her plate. What had caused the antipathy she sensed from Matthew and Thomas? Thomas was seated on her other side, and she glanced at him, groping for an explanation for the hostility she felt emanating from him. What had she ever done to him? She didn't particularly like him, much preferring Simon's easy manner, but there had never been unpleasantness between them. Feeling her eyes upon him, Thomas looked up and gave her a cool stare. With thinly concealed sarcasm, he said, "The last time was an overturned carriage. Tell me, Miss Townsend, what calamity brings you to Windermere this time?" "Bats," answered Cornelia from across the table. The expression in her eyes, as they fixed on him, had Thomas sitting bolt upright and concentrating on the snowy tablecloth as if his life depended upon it. It probably did. She hadn't missed the unfriendly looks flashed Emily's way by either Matthew or Thomas, and she wasn't about to have Emily made the least uncomfortable by anyone, particularly not this impertinent, nosy stripling. A whole swarm of them swooped out of a hole in the attics and roasted in our bedrooms, she went on coolly, her gimlet stare switching to Matthew. He paled as he came under the full power of that hazel gaze. "Walker should have them removed in a day or two, and we will return home," she added carelessly. With a smile that drippled ice, she turned her attention back to Thomas and asked, "Does that answer your question, young man?" Thomas muttered something unsatisfied. He wouldn't dare risk her displeasure again. She said warmly to Barnaby, "And now, where were we, my lord?" Barnaby hid a smile, but vowed never to give her cause to look at him as she had Matthew and Thomas. "I believe that you were telling me how charming you found my great-grandfather, and how I seem to have inherited the same incredible charm." Cornelia cackled with delight, and the awkward moment passed. Breakfast was eventually finished, and while Peckham, at Barnaby's request, gave the ladies a tour of Windermere's famous conservatory, the gentlemen retired to Barnaby's study. Barnaby's study was a handsome room in the oldest part of the mansion. The oak wainscot and the beautifully carved coffered ceiling dating back to the days of the original castle. A rug in brilliant jeweled tones lay on the walnut parquet floor, and chairs and sofas in fine fabrics and leather were spread about the big room. Tables with marble tops were placed conveniently throughout the area. Books lined one wall, a massive desk and chair arranged in front of them, a huge black marble fireplace dominated the other wall, and burgundy velvet drapes hung at the tall, narrow windows. Barnaby sat in the oxblood, Vrada's overstuffed chair at one side of the fireplace. Matthew stood at the other end of the fireplace. A twin to the chair in which Barnaby sat was at the opposite end of the fireplace, and Thomas had chosen to sit there. Not far, Barnaby noticed sardonically from Matthew. Simon, on the other hand, was sprawled on the gilded wood, soft covered in a Bouvier tapestry centered in front of the fireplace, his long legs stretched toward the fire that blazed and crackled on the hearth. As if there had been no pause, the moment the four men were settled, Matthew took up the argument that Emily and Cornelia's entrance into the morning room had interrupted. "You could not be serious about marrying her," Matthew said grimly. "Of course I am. You yourself have pointed out to me, among countless other things, that it's important that I marry. A mocking light in the dark eyes," he added. "I would have thought you'd be overjoyed that I am, for once, following your advice." Matthew looked as if he would explode. Between clenched teeth he managed, "Yes, it's important that you marry, but it is equally important that the woman you marry equals you in rank and fortune." Taking a deep breath, he said carefully, "Miss Townsend is a delightful young woman, and I'm sure that she will make some men a wonderful wife, but not yours. I can name two or three young women who would be much more suitable. The Duke of Ashford's eldest daughter, for instance. She comes with an impressive dowry, and her family is noble and well connected." When Barnaby merely stared at him, he went on almost desperately. "If she is not to your liking, there is the Earl of Mansfield's only child. She is not yet 20, a pretty little thing, and is heiress to thousands of acres of land, and a handsome fortune in the funds. Either one would be far more suitable to be the next Viscountess Jocelyn Emily Townsend." Thomas into the fray. "Miss Townsend is a charming young lady, no denying it," Tom said. "But good gad, she has no fortune to speak of. She's near as on the shelf as makes no matter, and while her father was the local squire, she has no claim to noble blood. She is a nobody. You cannot marry her. Barnabas' eyes narrowed on Thomas. I would tread cautiously there if I were you. I don't recall that you have any say in who I marry or don't marry. Tom flushed and muttered, I meekly meant that you have not yet had an opportunity to meet other more eligible young women. As I said, Miss Townsend is charming, but I urge you to consider the great position she will hold as your wife. Simon spoke up. A teasing gleam in his eyes, he said, my money is on Emily. She's a bruising rider and can birth a lamb as expertly as any shepherd, he grinned at Barnaby. With your flocks, that's a necessary virtue. But hardly, snapped Thomas, an ability that the Viscount Jocelyn needs. I like Emily, admitted Matthew reluctantly. Knowing her since she was a child, but she has spent most of her life buried here in the country, and has little concept of the world and what being your wife would entail. When Barnaby remained unmoved, he burst out, damn it, Aunt Barnaby, she is a little more than a country bumpkin. Softly, Barnaby said, as I warned Tom, I would tread carefully, especially when speaking of the woman I intend to marry. Matthew's lips whitened. Your mind is made up? Barnaby nodded. Telling you my plans was only a courtesy, he said, rising to his feet. I don't need your permission, and while I intend your position, it does not change mine. I intend to marry Emily just as soon as I can arrange it. He smiled sweetly and murmured, and now, if you will excuse me, I must go and see how my future bride is faring. Barnaby found Emily Cornelia in the conservatory seated on a stone bench before a pool of water that swam with the brilliant gold and orange flashes of the darting goldfish among the artfully planted lily pads. The expression is polite. The ladies were listening to Peckham as he pointed out the impressive variety of tropical plants before them. This is but a small section containing vines and shrubs and trees from the tropics. Pointing, he said, those purple and white orchids you see on the other side of the pond were originally acquired by the sixth Viscount, and the banana trees next to the orchids actually bear fruit. We also have pineapples and an odd fruit called guava. He smiled proudly. Our ferns are renowned for the many different species that have been collected over the years. If you would like, I can show. Barnaby's low cough stopped Peckham in midstream, and seeing his employer standing there, Peckham said, My lord, I was just telling the ladies. Yes, yes, I overheard you, Barnaby said hastily, and a very good job you were doing. I'm sure you have enjoyed the tour immensely, but I can take over now. Peckham bowed and departed, disappearing into the jungle like Roe. Smiling, Barnaby strode over to the ladies. Was he a dead boy? He asked. Perhaps not dead, Emily replied, and Barnaby threw back his head and laughed, aware of the rush of attraction she felt for him. Emily looked away, wishing that she hadn't found him quite so appealing. Did you finish your business with your cousins? Cornelia asked, eyeing him. Yes, and Barnaby grinned at her, and if you'll allow me a few moments alone with your great niece, I will settle things and we can all rest easy. Open mouthed, Emily stared at Cornelia, looking very pleased, rose to her feet, and said airily, I am an old lady and need my rest. I think I shall go lie down. A moment later she was gone, the gently waving fronds the only sign of her passing. Emily glanced up at Barnaby, and her heart neatly leaped out of her throat at the intent expression in his gaze. Uneasily she asked, What is going on? Why did she leave us alone like this? Barnaby's mouth quirked. Your great aunt has merely given me the privacy I need to declare myself, he said gently. Emily blinked at him, her mouth dry, her pulse galloping. She said stupidly, Declare yourself? What do you mean? Pulling her to her feet, he murmured, Why? Only that I am asking you to marry me. Drawing her into his embrace, he brushed his lips against hers. Will you? As Emily stared up into those rough, horned features, her lips tingling from that light touch of his. But you said that you were not serious when you asserted to Answorth that you were meant to marry me, she accused, her great eyes nearly silver with the emotion swirling through her. And you said that I wasn't serious, he said. All I did was let you believe what you wanted. Her fingers clenched the fine fabric of his dark blue coat, and she gasped, You want to marry me? He smiled and said softly, No. I mean to marry you." Speechless, she stared at him, trying to grab a coherent thought out of the chaos that swirled in her brain. His lips found hers again, this time lingering, pressing warmly against hers, and the light shivered in her veins. Unconsciously, she strained nearer, and Barnaby lost his head. His mouth hardened with passion, his tongue probing between her lips. Emily had no thought to deny him, and she shuddered in wonder at that first hungry invasion, his tongue sliding intimately along hers. With each hot thrust of his tongue, each slow, sensual exploration, he taught her the difference between kisses and kisses. Heat and hunger calling on her belly. When Barnaby finally lifted his head, she was warm and polite in his arms, conscious of a glamour in her body. This was as foreign as it was unexpected. Had she ever felt the desire to lose herself in the man's embrace? Ever felt the yearning to cast caution to the wind to let herself be swept away by the sensations he aroused? With his mouth only inches from hers, his arms holding her close, Emily could not think. She could only feel, and she felt wonderful. Breathing heavily, his eyes roamed over her dazed features. What he saw there must have satisfied him, because his head dipped and his mouth took hers again, this time hungrier and more explicit in its demand. He always kept his desire for her vigorously controlled, but he knew from almost the first moment he seen her that he wanted her. He was unprepared, however, for the fierce exultation that thundered through him when she returned his kiss, her tongue slipping shyly into his mouth, her soft body pressing against him. Crushing her next to him, his hands dropped to her hips, and he pulled her closer to the swollen, aching length of him. In the grip of mindless desire, his hands closed around the sweet growth of her buttocks, and he rocked slowly, intimately against the notch between her thighs, letting her feel just how much he wanted her. The world blurred, and he lost himself in the heady sweetness of her. Having her finally in his arms, her mouth eager beneath his, was addicting, and with his body begging for more, he nearly tipped onto the floor and completed the union he so desperately wanted. But some silver of sanity remained to his regret. Slowly, but with increasing persistence, common sense won over the reckless urge. Reluctantly, he brought them back to earth, moving her tempting body away from his too eager one, allowing himself one last searing kiss. Barnaby lifted his head and stepped back from her. "Unless you want me to ravish you here and now," he said huskily, "this must stop." Emily blinked at him, with his mouth no longer seducing hers, and his hands no longer holding her in his embrace. Lucidly rushed through her. Jocelyn asked her to marry him. Did she dare? A thousand thoughts traced through her brain. Never mind the state of her steely heart. There were too many other things to consider: the smuggling and Cornelia. The smuggling, the investors who depended upon her, the smuggling, Walker and Mrs. Spaulding, the smuggling. Her hysterical bubble rose up in her chest. The Viscountess Jocelyn, smuggler extraordinaire. Good God, it was bad enough she risked her own family's honor. She wasn't about to drag Jocelyn to the same quagmire. Barnaby knew the moment she had made a decision, and from the way his eyes slid from his, she knew her answer. The stubborn little chip was going to turn him down, and not because she wasn't attracted to him. Her response told him that she wasn't indifferent to him, quite the opposite. While not she wasn't indifferent to him, while not a vain man, he concluded that there could only be one reason for Emily's reaction of his suit: the bloody smuggling. Not certain if he was offended, hurt, or just annoyed, Barnaby jerked her into his arms. His dark eyes bored into hers, he growled, "If you dare try to refuse me because of some stupid idea, then I'm going to be horrified to discover that you and Robert are only a band of smugglers." Purged the thought. Ignoring her gasp, his hands tightened on her arms, and he said, "I already know about it. Cornelia told me." He took a deep breath, admitting, "I can't say that. Having my wife running contraband on the noses of the revenuers is precisely the pastime I would have chosen. But once we are married, we should find something less illegal to occupy your time." Emily stiffened, and the gray eyes glittered dangerously. She asked sweetly, "Pastimes such as filling your nursery?" A slow smile crossed his face. "It's not out of the question." When she began to struggle, he pulled her resistant body next to his, and despite her efforts to escape, his lips found hers, and he kissed them. With his mouth on hers, she fought against the overpowering tide of emotion that blotted out every emotion but the insidious demand of her heart and the drunken power of his kiss. Dizzy, unable to think, her arms crept around his neck, and she lost the struggle to resist him. More than anything in the world, she realized giddily this was where she wanted to be. Feeling her mouth soften against his, he murmured against her lips, "Please, please put me out of my misery and say you'll marry me." It was madness. Folly. But she could not help herself, and as if from a great distance, Emily heard herself say, "Yes, I will marry you." Barnaby shouted and swung her up in his arms. Bursting her soundly, his eyes full of wicked announcement, he said, "Now let's go make the announcement to my family and watch Matthew turn purple."